Last lesson, we learned all about call signs. In today's lesson, we're going to move on to the next section in the Gordon West Manual, which is called control. Control. Oops. Let me fix that. That's not good. Whoa. Okay. As you can see, we're having a very hard time controlling this computer program. All right. I think now we have this under control. So now let's move on to the section on control. And specifically, what we're talking about today is trying to control our ham radio station and what that all entails. So there we go. We finally got control of the easel. So anyway, we need to familiarize ourselves first with one term. And the first thing we're going to look at in this section on control is the word control operator. And you're going to hear this term a lot when you talk about control on, when you talk about control on ham radio. So what is a control operator? A control operator is, you can actually derive the meaning just from the name. A control operator is an operator who controls the radio and all the equipment. The control operator is the operator who controls everything. And your station is never allowed to transmit without a control operator. There's always needs to be someone in place who is controlling the station. And this is even true with automatic stations. And by that, I mean stations that sort of operate themselves automatically. Maybe they have some sort of computer set up that, and somehow they can automatically transmit for themselves. And an example of this might be repeater stations. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But anyway, even for automatic control stations that automatically control themselves, a control operator is still needed. You always need a control operator 100% of the time. Now, as you've probably guessed, only licensed hams can be control operators. This should make sense since only people who have a ham radio license are allowed to operate and control the equipment. That's what your license is for. So that's the first big term you need to know, the control operator. And now we're going to move on to a second term which is equally important, and that term is station licensee. Station licensee. And you're going to hear this a lot as well, especially on the technician class exam. And the station licensee, that's not hard either. The station licensee is just the licensed ham who owns the station, the licensee who owns the station. So guess what? It's the job of the station licensee to designate who the control operator is. Now, usually, as you probably guessed, the station licensee and the control operator are the same person. After all, it's your station, you own the license, and you get to operate it with your license. The station licensee and the control operator should be the same, right? The person who owns the license should control the station. They're the same person. And in fact, in most cases, this is correct. Usually, these are the exact same person. They're the exact same thing. In fact, unless there's some kind of documentation that says otherwise, the FCC assumes that the control operator is the station licensee, since this is really the logical choice. But there are some exceptions to this rule where the station licensee and the control operator are not the same person. And this might not make sense at first, but let me present you with this scenario. For example, say your friend comes over and he operates your ham radio station. He is the control operator. He's controlling the radio, but you are the station licensee since it's your station. So it's sort of mind-blowing that you can even think about it this way. If you look at this little red guy, you can see he's getting very surprised right now. His head's kind of going to explode. So yeah, you may not think about it this way at first, but this can happen. In fact, this is actually allowed to happen. Your friend can come over and operate your station, and you can have your license, although your friend will probably have a license as well. But if your friend, who's another ham, comes and operates your station, he's a control operator, you're the station licensee because you own the station. Now, when this happens, when the control operator is not the station licensee, both of you are equally responsible for whatever happens. So if someone messes up, if your friend messes up and breaks the FCC rules, it's both of your faults. And by the way, about the FCC rules, that's in the next lesson, Mind the Rules, which is going to be a really, really fun lesson. Anyway, going back to control, we know there are 3 different levels of licensing, and each one gives you different privileges to operate on the air. Going back to what we just talked about, where a friend comes and controls your station, what if there is a separate control operator and station licensees? They're not the same person. These are 2 different people, and they have different license classes. So say one person has technician class, one person has extra class. How does this translate to the privileges that you can transmit on in this situation? Well, as you may or may not have guessed, the transmitting privileges of a station depend on the control operator's licensing class. And this should make sense. The control operator is the one operating. His license should get to decide where he should operate. So it always falls on the control operator. Whatever the control operator is allowed to operate on, that's what the station's allowed to operate on in this specific scenario. And because of this important rule, a technician class control operator cannot operate on extra class segments of the bands. And again, this should be pretty obvious. A technician cannot operate on extra class only frequencies because he's not extra class. A general class cannot operate on extra class because he's not an extra class. You have to stay within your privileges. So technicians normally can't operate in extra class only frequencies. There are some cool exceptions to this, but they're not covered on the test. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go over them right now. If you're curious about it, you can send me a message in the forum and I can get back to you. All right, so now we're going to move on to a separate topic, which is also within not mind the rules, but within control. So you may or may not remember how I said earlier in this course how you can talk to astronauts in space. And this is actually also falls under the section of control. For space communications, including if you want to listen to satellites, any ham who has privileges to transmit on the satellite's frequency can be the control operator while you're talking to that satellite. If you have the privileges to transmit on the satellite's frequency, you can talk to the satellite. And the good news here is that as a technician class licensee, you actually have privileges and you're able to operate on the frequencies where the spacemen hang out, and you can talk to satellites and space stations. And we're going to devote a whole section to that later. I believe it's section 12 later on in that course, so definitely hang on for that. All right, so now we're going to move away from the subject of control operator, and let's talk about something else. Instead of the control operator, we're going to talk now about the control point. What is the control point? And the control point, again, it's obvious from the name. The control point is the point or the location at which the station is being controlled, hence the name control point. Now, this is where things get really interesting. Believe it or not, you don't actually have to be right in front of your station to be able to control it. In fact, you can often control your ham radio remotely over the internet using special software. And I've actually done this plenty of times. For example, I used to visit my grandparents in Florida, and I would access and control my station in New York, which is where I live. I would control it over the internet with software, and that allowed me to operate my station even though I was hundreds of miles away in Florida. And this is actually allowed by the FCC. As far as they're concerned, my station just has a really long microphone cable that stretches all the way to Florida, via the internet, of course. Anyway, there's actually a name for this type of control, and this is called remote control. Now, this name can be kind of confusing because when you think of remote control, you probably think of remote control toys you played with as a kid, like cars and airplanes and stuff like that. This is not exactly what the FCC means, however. When remote control on ham radio doesn't mean controlling cars or planes in this way. It usually means controlling your station, almost like a remote control that you use to control your TV. A remote control in ham radio is used to control your station. So when the FCC refers to remote control, they mean remote control of a station, not remote control of some sort of airplane or boat or anything like that, although you can do that with ham radio. So when you're operating remote control in this way and you're controlling your station remotely over the internet, the control point in this situation is still the place where you are controlling everything. So if I'm in Florida and I'm controlling my station in New York via the internet, the control point is in Florida because I'm controlling everything in Florida. That's the control point, the location where I'm controlling the station. Now, because of the ham radio exam and the questions on it, there are 3 rules you have to remember for remote control. And the first rule is that the control operator must always be present at the control point during remote operation. You can't just walk away from the controls while your station's operating. So the control operator must always be present at the control point. We'll take a minute to write that down for you so you can take notes. Secondly, the control operator must indirectly manipulate the controls. So again, when you're operating remotely, you should still be able to indirectly manipulate the controls of your radio via the internet or something. You still have to be in control. You must indirectly manipulate the controls. That's the second rule. And the third rule is that the station always needs a control operator, which can almost be implied from the first rule. I'm running out of space, so I'm going to write that over here in this corner. The third rule, the station always needs a control operator. So again, the station can't just transmit automatically with no one being able to control it. I can't just leave the computer controlling my radio and go off to Disneyland and play while my station just sits and transmits by itself. Why? Because I don't have control over my station during that time. I need to be present at my computer. I must be able to control my radio over the internet or something, and I need to be the control operator. So the whiteboard's getting kind of crowded, so I'm going to go ahead and clear it now so we have more space. Brightness to 0. Much better. All right, so we're almost done. We're going to go over a few more things in this lesson. And one of them has to do with local control. So when you're actually physically present at the station, you're sitting in front of your radio, that's called local control. Hence the word local. You're locally there at the same location as your station. And the reason I'm telling you all this information, even though it is kind of technical, is because it might end up on your technician class test. As of 2018, this is all tested on the exam. So that's why I'm presenting all this information to you, including local control, which is tested. On a similar vein, the test is also going to expect you to know that repeater operations use automatic control. And I haven't explained exactly to you what a repeater is yet, because we're going to dedicate an entire section to that in section 8. But for now, just know that a repeater is basically a station that takes whatever signals it receives and it retransmits them on another frequency. And it does all this automatically without the aid of a human operator. It's just programmed to do that. So this is called automatic operation. Now wait a minute though. If there's no human present at the station, isn't that a violation of the rules for control operators that we just talked about? And it turns out actually it isn't. You see, not only is a repeater an example of automatic control, it's also remote control all over again, because there is a control operator for the repeater who can access the repeater, maybe through the internet or something, from his house. So there's still a control operator even in these automatic control setups. Now, since repeaters do have control operators, this might bring another question to your mind. Does that mean that the control operator of the repeater is responsible for whatever is transmitted on the repeater? So, for instance, if the repeater repeats a signal that came from another ham and that transmission somehow violates the FCC rules, who is responsible for that rule violation? The person who transmitted that signal to the repeater or the repeater control operator? And in a case like this, it's solely the fault of the person who transmitted the signal to the repeater. It's not the fault of the repeater control operator, because the illegal transmission originated from the control operator. So in such a situation, it's the fault of the person who transmitted the signal to the repeater. He alone is responsible. All right, so we're almost done. I just want to throw in one more quick thing here. Over and over in this course, I've said you're not allowed to use ham radio for your business. You're not allowed to get paid for using ham radio. Now, it turns out there is one more exception to this rule about getting paid to operate ham radio, which is also classified in the Gordon-West Manual under the 6th section of control. And that exception is if you're a teacher. So the exception is if you're a teacher or an instructor at some sort of institution. So if you're a teacher, then you get to operate a ham radio in front of your class to teach them about ham radio, even though you do get paid to be a teacher to teach them about ham radio. Using ham radio for educational purposes in a classroom is allowed, even if you're a teacher who's getting paid for the class. That is allowed, and you might want to make a note to this exception. All right, so we've covered a lot of stuff in this section, and I know you must be tired, but so there's no addendum video for this lesson. You can go straight on to studying this section in the Gordon-West Manual and taking the quiz. So let me just write this last piece of info down that I just said so you can take that in your notes. And once you've got that, you can move on. I'll see you in the next video.